Welcome back to the Deep Dive. It is Monday, January 26th, 2026. Today, we're unpacking a shift that has felt, I don't know, inevitable for years. And yet, now that we're looking at the data, it feels totally surreal.
Yeah, surreal is absolutely the right word. It's one thing to read the sci-fi, but it's another thing entirely to read the quarterly reports.
We are looking at sources that really explain the ground shifting right beneath our feet. And I want to start with something cultural, because usually when we talk about viral content in the mid-2020s, we're talking about high-octane entertainment.
Explosions, yeah. 15-second dance trends.
Exactly, or maybe a cat doing backflips. But late last year, late 2025, we saw this huge anomaly. A documentary called The Thinking Game dropped. And on paper, it sounds incredibly boring. It's filmed inside a lab, it's quiet, it's mostly just people staring at whiteboards, and yet hundreds of millions of views?
It was the water cooler moment of the year. No question.
So why? What did people see in that?
I think it was the intimacy of it all. For years, we've heard about the algorithm or the AI, like it's this weather event that just happens to us. But the thinking game pulled the curtain back. It showed the human obsession. We weren't just watching machines. We were watching people trying to build a mind.
And that's our hook for today. That documentary was the vehicle, but the subject, the thing they were building, that's the real story. We are diving into the race for AGI, Artificial General Intelligence.
The Holy Grail.
The Holy Grail. And we're not just looking at the movie notes. We've pulled together a stack of sources that is, frankly, a bit intimidating. We've got the production scripts, yes, but we also have technical breakdowns of the 2024 Nobel Prize, economic reports from the IMF and the ILO, and some pretty heavy governance texts.
From the EU and the US Pentagon, yeah.
Right.
It's a heavy mix, but you have to. You can't understand AGI just by looking at the code. You have to look at the economics, the science, and unfortunately the warfare.
So let's unpack this. The mission today is pretty simple. What are we actually building? And why is it reshaping everything from, how we cure cancer to how we hire junior employees? And to get there, we have to rewind a bit. We have to go back to the spark.
The moment the hype became history.
Exactly, because for a long time, for the average person, AI was, what? A chatbot. You could write a funny limerick about your dog or maybe summarize an email. It was cool, but it wasn't, earth-shattering.
A software, a utility.
But the sources point to this one moment where the conversation shifted from gadget to scientific instrument. And that takes us to the 2024 Nobel Prize in Chemistry.
This is absolutely the cornerstone. If you want to understand the race we are in right now in 2026, you have to look at that prize.
Right.
It went to Demis Hassabis and John Jumper from DeepMind, and also David Baker. And the headliner was AlphaFold.
Okay, I remember the headlines, but let's do a quick look. I'm 5. I barely passed high school biology. Why was AlphaFold winning a Nobel Prize such a massive deal?
So think about your body. It's run by proteins. And proteins are basically these long strings of amino acids. But to work, to actually do anything, that string has to fold up into a very specific, very complex 3D shape.
Like frantic origami or something.
That's a great way to put it. Frantic origami. And the shape is everything. The shape is the function. If you know the shape, you know how it interacts with a cell or a virus or a new drug. For 50 years, biology had this folding problem.
Right.
We knew the sequence of the string, the DNA tells us that, but we couldn't easily predict the shape. You had to crystallize it, shoot X-rays at it. It took years. A PhD student would sometimes spend their entire academic career on one protein.
One protein?
Yeah.
And there are, what, millions?
Hundreds of millions in nature. It was a bottleneck for the entire human race. And then AlphaFold came along, and using deep learning, it solved it. It didn't just guess. It predicted the structures of pretty much all known proteins. It compressed decades, centuries, really, of work into minutes.
That's the key insight right there. It's not just about biology, it's about compression.
Exactly. The Nobel Committee wasn't just rewarding a biology breakthrough. They were validating a new method of discovery. The source material calls it AI as a scientific instrument. We aren't building machines to mimic human chit-chat anymore. We are building machines to navigate search spaces that are just way too big for our brains.
And if you can do that for proteins...
You can do it for battery materials. You can do it for fusion reactors, for microchip architecture. The big takeaway is this concept. Discovery speed equals strategic power.
And that explains the race part of our title. Because if you have the tool that invents the next antibiotic or the next battery twice as fast as your competitor...
You win. You win the market or you win the geopolitical standoff. That is why the labs in that documentary felt so obsessed. They weren't just coding, they were trying to build the ultimate inventor.
Which brings us to that three-letter acronym that everyone throws around, but I feel like nobody can define clearly. AGI, Artificial General Intelligence. If AlphaFold is the template, a genius at one specific thing, what is AGI?
That is the multi-billion-dollar question. And I dug through the technical notes from the sources, really hoping for, a clean definition. It's AGI if it scores 95% on this test.
Oh.
It's a mess. There is no single accepted checklist. It's a really slippery term.
That's frustrating. We hear about it constantly. We are building AGI. AGI is coming. You're telling me they don't know what it is?
I mean, they know when they see it, kind of. But generally, the distinction is narrow versus general. AlphaFold is narrow. It is a god at protein folding, but you can't ask it to write a poem or drive a car. AGI is about transfer. It's a system that can learn a concept in one area and apply it somewhere totally different. It can plan. It can reason.
So it's the Swiss Army knife versus the scalpel.
Right. But the Swiss Army knife that can invent new blades for itself. The sources mention that since we don't have a strict definition, the labs just use proxies to measure progress. They look at coding ability, reasoning benchmarks. But the most interesting one they mentioned is, can it help researchers invent new things?
That feels like a loop. AI helping build better AI.
It is a feedback loop. And that's why you hear terms like frontier models. They're pushing the edge of that capability. But this brings up a huge problem that the sources highlight. The goals get all tangled up. The scientific goal is make it smarter, make it faster. The societal goal is make it safe, make it aligned with human values.
And usually in engineering, speed and safety are trade-offs.
Exactly. If you're racing to build the ultimate inventor, do you stop for 6 months to check for hidden bias? Or do you just ship it because you know the other guy is shipping his next week?
That pressure cooker environment, it explains that quiet intensity in the documentary. But I want to pivot. We've talked about the science. Let's talk about the thing that actually keeps people up at night.
The economy. The robots are coming for our jobs. Anxiety.
We have reports here from the IMF, the ILO, and OECD, and I'll be honest, I expected them to be pure doom and gloom. But they're nuanced.
They are. It's not a simple story of everyone gets fired, but the scale is just massive. The IMF estimates that roughly 40% of global employment is exposed to AI.
40%. That is a staggering number.
It is. And if you zoom in on advanced economies like the US, the UK, Europe, that number jumps to about 60% because we have more cognitive jobs.
But we need to be careful with the word exposed, right? Exposure doesn't mean replaced. I'm exposed to sunlight doesn't mean I burn to a crisp.
That's a great analogy.
Yeah.
The ILO makes a big point of this. For many people, exposure just means augmentation. The AI handles the boring stuff, scheduling, data entry, and you become more productive. You get to do the human parts of the job.
Okay, so that's the sunny side. But there's a shadow here. The sources describe a phenomenon that I found really unsettling. They call it the broken ladder.
Yes. This is the insight that I think every listener needs to sit with, especially if you manage people or you're just starting your career.
Yeah.
The biggest risk isn't mass unemployment tomorrow. The risk is that the career ladder breaks at the bottom rung.
Okay, break that down for us. Let's use an example. Say a junior lawyer.
Okay, think about how you learn to be a great lawyer. When you're 23, fresh out of law school, what do? You don't argue in front of the Supreme Court. You do the grunt work. Reading thousands of pages of discovery, drafting simple contracts, summarizing case law.
It's boring, repetitive work. I've been there.
It is, but that boredom is actually training. By reading all those documents, you learn how the law is structured. You learn to spot patterns. You develop judgment.
And I see where you're going. If an AI can read all the discovery and draft the contract in 10 seconds.
Then the law firm stops hiring junior associates to do it. Why pay a human to do what software does instantly? But if you remove those entry-level tasks, you remove the training ground.
So how does the junior associate ever become the senior partner?
That's the broken ladder. We might be creating a world with these incredible tools and high-level experts, but no bridge for the next generation to get there. The OECD even notes this shift in skill demand toward management and coordination. But you can't just jump into management.
You can't manage work you don't understand. Wow. That is profound. It's not a crisis of jobs. It's a crisis of mentorship. We're cutting off the supply of future experts.
Exactly. And this isn't a technology problem to solve. It's a human resources problem. Companies have to fundamentally change how they train people.
So we have a scientific revolution, a potential breakdown in human capital, and naturally, when things move this fast, governments try to step in.
Turning chaos into paperwork as one analyst put it.
You've seen a flurry of activity, the EU, the US, global summits. It feels like everyone is trying to grab the steering wheel.
They are, but they're grabbing different parts of the wheel. The EU moved first with the EU AI Act. It's very European, structured, rules-based.
That's a good framework.
They do. It's based on risk categories. They just ban some things entirely, like social scoring. And then they put heavy regulations on high-risk systems, like AI used in hiring.
And the US.
The U.S. is more flexible. Yeah. They're leaning on the NIST AI risk management framework. It's voluntary. It's more about identifying risks as you build, rather than just banning things.
And then we had those summits at Bletchley Park in Seoul.
Right. Those were about frontier AI. The really powerful, potentially dangerous stuff. The focus there was just getting countries to agree on safety testing before models get released.
But here's the thing that always strikes me. We're trying to use legislative tools, which, let's be honest, move at the speed of a glacier, to regulate a technology that moves at the speed of light.
That is the core philosophical problem.
Yeah.
The source material uses a brilliant analogy here. It says we are trying to regulate this tech as if we were building bridges.
Meaning?
When you regulate a bridge, you write the code, the bridge gets built, it stays a bridge, it doesn't wake up the next morning with a new lane or the ability to fly. It's static.
But AI?
AI evolves like biology. The model you regulated in January might be totally different by June because of an update. It's a moving target.
So traditional regulation is basically always fighting the last war.
Pretty much. We're writing rules for the Model T while they're inventing the jet engine in the lab next door.
So we have a moving target in the lab,
Huh.
a broken ladder in the economy, and a regulatory system that's just scrambling. But there is one more chapter in our source material, and honestly, it's the darkest one.
Warfare.
Yeah. We have to talk about military applications, because while that viral documentary was about the wonder of science, the sources make it very clear that militaries are watching this closely.
They are. And we need to move past the Hollywood version of this. It's not just about T-800 Terminators marching down the street.
What is it then?
It's logistics. It's cyber operations. It's intelligence analysis. Imagine an AI that can look at satellite imagery of the entire globe in real time and spot a troop movement before a human analyst has even finished their coffee. That is that strategic power we talked about.
But we also have documents here about lethal autonomous weapons.
We do. Specifically, the U.S. Department of Defense Directive 3000.09. It was updated in January 2023. This is the rulebook for autonomy in weapon systems.
Autonomy in weapon systems. That is such a sterile way of saying machines that can pull the trigger.
Essentially. Now, the directive is strict. It requires distinct approval processes. And there are ongoing debates at the UN. But there's a nightmare scenario here that the sources highlight. It's called the accountability crisis.
Is this the who do you blame problem?
Exactly. Let's play this out. Say you have an autonomous drone swarm. It's programmed to target enemy combatants. But the code interacts with the environment in some weird way, or the algorithm hallucinates, and it attacks a civilian convoy.
Okay. A tragedy occurs. Who goes to jail?
That's the gap. Is it the programmer who wrote the code 3 years ago? They didn't intend for this to happen. Is it the commander who deployed the swarm? They didn't pull the trigger. The machine did. Is it the manufacturer?
It breaks the chain of command.
It severs the moral link between action and consequence. In the past, war was terrible, but there was always a human behind the spear or the gun. With autonomy, you outsource the kill decision. And we do not have a legal or ethical framework for that yet.
That's chilling. It's not just a technical problem, it's a moral void.
It is. And unlike the broken ladder in the economy, a mistake here isn't a lost job. It's a war crime with no criminal.
So if we look at the big picture here, we have incredible scientific potential, deep economic disruption, a regulatory scramble, and a fundamental shift in warfare. The question I keep coming back to is, why does this race feel so inevitable? Why can't we just pause?
Because of the prisoner's dilemma.
If I stop and you don't,
I lose. And I don't just lose a quarterly profit, I lose strategic dominance. If China or the US or the EU pauses and their rivals keep pushing, they risk falling behind. It is politically impossible to say slow down when the advantage is this big.
so instead of stopping, society is attempting to, what was that phrase in the notes?
Build while steering.
Build while steering.
We are creating frameworks and safety commitments while the car's already moving at 300 kilometers an hour. We aren't checking the brakes in the garage, we're trying to install them on the highway.
It's a terrifying and exhilarating image.
It is. And it brings us right back to that documentary we started with. That obsession in the lab. That's the engine of the car.
So, As we wrap up this deep dive into the race for AGI, what is it the one thing, the one insight you want the listener to walk away with? We've covered a lot of ground today.
I think we need to look past the machines. That viral documentary showed us the tech, and it's so easy to get mesmerized by the code and the robots. But the real story is about us.
How so?
The race isn't just about whether machines get smarter. I mean, that is happening. Physics and math are taking care of that part. The real race is whether our ethics, our laws, and our social systems, our wisdom, basically, can evolve as fast as our tools.
Wisdom versus capability.
That's it. We're building gods in a sense. The real question is, are we mature enough to live with them?
That is a massive thought. And I want to add one final personal challenge for everyone listening. We talked about the broken ladder. If AI takes away the doing, the drafting, the coding, the summarizing, how do you preserve the learning? That is something I want you to mull over. In your own life, in your own career, if the easy parts of your job disappear tomorrow, how do you ensure you're still growing? Because if we lose the ability to learn, we lose a lot more than just paychecks.
That's the human question beneath the machine question.
Thank you for joining us on this deep dive. It's a lot to process, but that's why we're here, to help you make sense of the noise.
Thanks for listening.
We'll see you next time.